All stand, please. Please be seated.
Yes, Mr. Yes. Mr. Thomas could return to the witness box, please, Your Honour.
You remain on an oath as previously sworn, do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Reid. Thank you, Your Honour. Mr. Thomas, would you have a look at the document displayed on the screen at the moment? Do you recognise that document, and if so, could you tell His Honour what it is?
Yes, Your Honour, I do recognise the document, and it relates to my experience in fire cause determination, in particular fire investigation.
So I attend to that.
Your Honour, I'm not formally objecting to the tender at the moment. We'd not been provided with a copy of this document before it was added to the court book over lunchtime. I've not had a chance to read it, and I may need to ask Your Honour to stand the matter down at some point so that I can read it before I have to cross-examine Mr. Thomas.
Yes, well, as far as I'm concerned, everything's under the umbrella of my Divina Esse ruling.
Thank you, Your
At the
Honour.
moment. Yes. Now, if we could return to the screenshot, which was CT1, please, Mr. Tempone. Thank you. And the question I wanted to ask, or question that I do ask, is this: did you find anything on that walkthrough that assisted you with fire spread direction?
Yes, there were some major indicators on trees and some bushes that suggested fire extension away from the, let's call it the area near where the stump, or from where the trees commenced to the east of the stump.
And in which direction did those indicators show the fire went?
In an easterly direction, southeasterly direction, east to southeast.
Yep. And what were those indicators?
Markings, burn indicators on the trunks of trees and some leaf freeze.
Could the TFS report please be brought up, number 24? And if we could scroll down to the photographs. Did you take the opportunity to look at the photographs as you were moving through that first lap?
Correct.
And could you get Mr. Tempone to scroll down to photographs that that you were able to use by comparison with what you saw to reach that direction? That is the southeasterly fire spread direction.
Yes. If you just keep scrolling down, please, and I'll tell you when to stop. If you could just stop there, please. So the markings on the tree stumps in photograph 14 on the trunks of the trees would suggest fire extension away in a south to southeasterly direction.
You'll see an arrow on that photograph and a descriptor. Do you agree or disagree with the arrow and the descriptor?
No, I don't disagree with that at all.
Thank you. Continue.
Maybe if we could just go a little slower through these, please. Yes, keep going. Yes, well, photograph 16 is a a clear indicator.
Well, just go back for a moment to 16. You'll see the descriptor. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, agree with that.
Thank you.
Yes, agree with the descriptor on photograph 17 as well.
Thank you.
I think that maybe photograph 18 is photograph 17, just with the tape measure in place.
Continue. Continue.
Continue, yes.
20.
Yes, photograph 20 is a little harder to determine, but it seems that the descriptor is correct.
Thank you.
'21, agree.
Thank you.
Yes, very obvious.
Thank you. Keep going past
Yes.
that, I think. Yes.
And here we have some leaf freeze on some of the smaller shrubs, which is suggesting fire extension in the general direction that the white arrow is indicating away in that southeasterly
Now,
direction.
was that available to you on your inspection, or you reliant only on the photograph?
There was some evidence on my inspection of that, but it was consistent with the photograph.
Thank you. Photo 25.
I don't actually recall photograph 25.
Do you agree with the descriptor?
I agree with the descriptor, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Photograph 26.
Is a wonderful example of leaf freeze.
Thank you. Does that assist? Photo 27 assist you?
Doesn't assist me at all, I'm sorry.
28, does that assist you at all?
Only from an orientation perspective from where I commenced my digging of the fire scene at a later date.
Thank you. Keep scrolling through, please. Photograph 35, does that assist you?
I would not disagree with what's being shown in photograph 35 from a fire extension perspective, in particularly at the point of the V.
Thank you. And any comment about photo 36?
Nothing further than what I've said.
Right, could we go back to CT1, please? Now, after you did that lap, what did you then do?
I did a further lap.
And can you take Mr. Temponi on that journey, please?
I can.
We might just mark that first one, Mr. Temponi, with a 1, maybe up near the end of the arrow, perhaps. Thank you, and Mr. Thomas can go on the second journey.
The second journey, above the 1 that has just been put onto the screen, to the east of that, about where the bush meets to the left, sorry. To the left, a little further to the left, a little further along the line. No, just further straight along the line, the red line that you have there. Back to the right, back to the right. Okay, from about there, I did a lap extending down towards the black tree stump, or what looks like a black tree on the right. Yes, and then around the burnt area. Yes, perfect. And then you can't see then it extends to the edge of the photograph where I walk to. Yes,
Right.
more so in a straight line than across. No, down. Yeah, stop. Back across to the right, please. Across to the right a little bit further, about to the edge of the page, and then you can't see where I continued along further.
Right. Now, Mr. Tempone, if you can draw that, and we'll see if Mr. Thomas agrees with what you draw. You content with that, Mr. Thomas?
Approximately, yes.
Now, when you then went out of the photograph, where did you go when you went out of the photograph?
Continued,
Up or down?
continued, if we call it down, which would be to the west, and around in a semicircle to the front of the house and back to the driveway.
Right, so if we go outside well, perhaps we can't, no. Just put some, can you draw outside the screenshot, Mr. Tempone? You can. Excellent. So if you can take your cursor as you understood the evidence, Mr. Tempone.
Yes, further out, I'm sorry, to the right. And yes, further to the right, to more of a curve in that line. That's and continue straight for instead of curving around at the bottom. If you could, please. No, go back. Go back. No, go back. Go back to where that's the spot. Thank you. And continue on and out to your right as we go around there. That's about it. And curve around towards the bottom, and then down to the bottom of the page. Lower down. Sorry, to the bottom of the page. Yes, further down. If you can go further down, correct. And along in an arc around the bottom, back to the driveway. Very good.
Can you just clean that up, please, Mr. Tempone? And whoops. Oh, I see. You're going to redraw it.
It's possibly a little further out than has been drawn there.
Oh, I think we get the picture.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Excellent. Now, on that trip, did you find anything to assist you in fire travel direction?
There was some evidence of fire extension to the west, particularly near where the number 2 is, and as it extended along a ridge line of a gully along that walk from number 2
Thank you.
forward.
Now, having done that lap, did you do anything else?
No.
When you got in your car to drive home after that, you'd been briefed to come out and read the fire service report and see if you could give any opinion as to fire cause. Did you have any opinion at that time?
The only opinion I had was that it was a very difficult fire scene to interpret. There was conflicting indicators to my mind. However, I wasn't certain at that stage that the fire had extended from what the fire service determined to be the area of fire origin.
Now, did you then make a suggestion to Messrs Dobson, Mitchell and Allport in relation to excavation?
I did indeed.
And did you return to conduct, you've got instructions and you returned to excavate that area?
I did.
Now, if we could take that down, please, and if we can get document document 539. That's not right, I'm sorry. I've got managed to get that, I'm sorry about this, Your Honour. It's the document 172. And if we can just put the first of those photos up, please. And now if we can split the screen and put document um, 19 up. If we could, yes, thank you. Now if we can scroll down document 19, please. Keep going, thank you. Right, now we come to photograph 5. You present in your report photographs of your initial work through to photograph 12. How long did it take you from the time that this photograph was taken until you completed that excavation work?
I'm not following, I'm sorry.
No, I'll start that again.
There's no beginning point,
No, appreciate that.
let alone a terminus ad quem.
Yes. The photograph that we see as photograph 5, you accept that's photograph 5 of your report?
Correct.
Thank you. Did you do anything to that ground before you took that photograph?
No.
So that ground was, and what did you determine to do as a result of what you saw that we're now seeing in that photograph?
To excavate the scene from the area in the foreground of that photograph back towards the stump.
Right. So how long did it take you to conduct that excavation on that day?
Approximately 2.5 or so hours.
Thank you. Now, can we come back to photograph 5? And you've referred to an area in the foreground. Can you get Mr. Tempone, please, to we'll screenshot that.
As I recall, it was the area slightly to the left of the large rock where the hole is apparent in the ground. Yes, perfect.
Mark that with an X.
May well have been a little closer to the foreground, but approximately around that area.
And now, why did you choose that point to commence your excavation?
It was approximately 3 metres or so from the stump. It seemed to me to be in the approximate area where the fire service were determining that they found the root, the charred root.
Thank you. Mr. Tempone, can we please expose the metadata for that photograph? And it appears that that photograph was taken at 12:16 on the 30th of March 2014. That accords with your memory?
That does.
Thank you. Now attend to that screenshot. Two or three, Mr. Tempone. Did I not? Oh no, I think I put all of that on the. That was one. Yes, thank you. Thank you. So that's C22. Thank you. Now. We go back to the split screen when you're ready, Mr. Tempone. And if we can move to the next photograph. Now, you'll see, what do we see in this photograph, Mr. Thomas?
We see the charred end of a root near the mouth of the shovel, and then we see root structure extending back towards the stump.
And in terms of tools, we can see a long-nosed shovel and a pick. Did you use either of those in the excavation?
Not in the excavation significantly. I don't recall using the pick at all. I took the pick in case there were rocks that needed to be levered out of position. I don't recall using the pick. The shovel was used at various times, most commonly though to put dirt onto the shovel from the small trowel that I was using in the excavation process.
Could we have a screenshot of that photograph, please? Yes, I think we can make it that size, thank you. Now, Mr. Thomas, the burnt end of the root, can you please take Mr. Tempone's cursor to that?
Yes, if Mr. Tempone comes down to near the mouth of the shovel, then he perfectly has the burnt end of the root. If he draws to the left and across the top and around that root. Yes, even be a little bit closer from the top, obviously, but on the right side, but that is the burnt end of the root.
Now, did you examine the remainder of that root, as is shown in the photograph?
Yeah, and further than shown in that photograph as well.
Right. Did you see any evidence of fire, or burning, combustion rather, between the burnt end and its commencement?
Not at all, no.
So what was its state?
It was in a normal state that I would expect for a tree that is obviously dead and the root structure is starting to decompose. A lot of the smaller, finer roots had completely decomposed, but some of the roots that were later identified were in the process of decomposition.
I tend to that. And can you uncover the metadata, please, for the photograph that is now CT3? So that was taken at 1:02 p.m, some 46 minutes after the first photograph.
I have no reason to doubt the metadata.
Thank you. Photograph 7, if we could get that, please. Yes. No, that one's not photograph 7. I don't believe, Mr. Tempone. It'll be, yes, it's 543. And that is a closer image of the previous photograph.
Correct.
Thank you. Is there anything that's shown in that close-up that you would like to point out to the court?
It just shows the decomposition of some of the root structure.
Where does it do that?
Bottom right corner.
Can you take the cursor to that, please?
Yes, Mr. Tempone's, yes, just that piece of wood. Yeah, perfect.
We put a circle around that, please.
And there's other decomposition or partial decomposition of the root structure, as I've alluded to as well.
Yes, attend to that. You go to the next, I'm sorry, Mr. Tempone. Can we go to the next photograph, please? Mr. Thomas, what does that photograph show?
Just further excavation of the fire scene and further evidence of the roots.
In the following photograph? What does that show?
Further excavation of the root structure. The shovel, is back in position, showing the charred end of the root, and partially along the handle towards the top of the photograph. The handle is beside a section of root which I actually broke during the excavation process.
Can Mr. Tempone's cursor go up the handle and you'll tell him when to stop?
Yes, I'll tell him when to stop. Keep going. If you stop there and draw a circle to your right. Stop. And if you draw a circle to your right, that's it. Beautiful. Yes, around that area. And that photograph also exposes a large root extending from left to right of the photograph that the charred root goes across the top of.
Now, what depth had the excavation got to at this stage?
I'd think I was around the 400 millimetre, maybe more, point at this stage. I did excavate deeper, but around the 400 millimetre mark, and as reference to that, clearly the shovel is, the mouth of the shovel is a reasonable size, and we can see that that is down reasonably low in the soil.
Thank you. I attend to that. If we could go to the next photograph, please. What does that show?
Further excavation of the dirt.
Thank you. The next photograph.
Obviously, significantly further excavation of the dirt. Further exposure of the root structure. We now have another root towards the top of that photograph extending from left to right with charring at the top. But the root structure is clearly evident for all to see.
The next photograph, please.
The other thing that you can see in that photograph, if you just go back, is the handle to my little trowel that I was using on the right side, the yellow handle.
Thank you. The next photograph.
Further excavation and clearing of the debris around the root structure, or the dirt around the root structure.
If we could just return to the metadata, please, Mr. Tempone. And that reveals that that photograph was taken at 2:46 on the 30th of March.
Yes, as I recall, I think that was the last image of that day.
Right. Now, you stopped for the day.
You stopped excavation of the scene for the day, yes.
Thank you. And you were asked by Mrs. Dobson-Mitchell to go back and do some further work.
I was indeed, yes.
And what were you requested to do?
To go around the stump, 360 degrees, and determine if there was any fire extension from the root structure around the stump.
Could we have 563 up, please? Now, was that photograph taken before or after you carried out the further work that you've been requested to carry out?
I can't recall. I think it was probably before. If I could just have a look at the sequence of my photos again, please, I might be able to be more accurate in regard to that. Yeah, if I could just look at the photo in large size again, please. It looks like I have, I'd say it's after, because on the left-hand side of the photograph you can see where I've removed dirt clearly around the root structure and exposing the root structure. And also at the rear I can see dirt that's been moved as well. So that's clearly at the end.
Right. And this photograph is photograph 13 in your report?
I'm not sure without having a copy of my...
I'll just ask that you accept that's the case.
Happy to accept.
Thank you. Now, you took a series of photographs that follow, so Mr. Tempone can move through them.
Yes, these are photographs taken at close range around the stump from various angles where I'd removed dirt from around the root structure.
Having removed the dirt and taken, maybe before you took the photographs, but we've got the photographs, what conclusion did you reach as to whether any fire had come from that stump into the roots?
There was no evidence at all of any fire extension from the stump through the root structure. From the stump away.
Is there any particular photograph that you wish to point to illustrate that evidence?
if I could just have a closer look at 563, please. Yes, well, 563 clearly shows the root structure of this tree, and I suspect the two large roots extending or with fire damage, char damage on the left side of the photograph towards the middle, the two large roots, yes, the two that are being indicated too. I'd suggest that they're possibly roots from another tree because of the direction that they're extending in, but there's no evidence at all of fire extending down through the root structure. It extends to ground level or a little under ground level and then stops in each and every instance, apart from the end of the root depicted where I commenced the excavation of dirt.
Now, Your Honour, I tender all of the photographs and as usual I have trouble locating the photograph numbers. Here we are. They were 172, I think, yes. Yes, so I tender document 172. If it plays.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Reid. Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Honour. I confess I'm a little confused. Given the process that we've gone through with Mr. Thomas's first report, could I ask my friend to tell me whether the second and third reports are also tendered?
Well, you can ask, but you may not get an answer, Mr. Reid.
Yes, I tendered them, Your Honour. I understood that they had been tendered. Oh,
Not to my knowledge. Ms. Gale?
All reports have been tendered.
yes.
All reports have been tendered.
The first report was tendered earlier in the proceedings, so the second and third report.
Thank you. I certainly have no recollection of that happening. The first report was tendered earlier.
Yes, I tendered all three when the witness got in the witness box.
Anyway, if they're on the exhibit list, then that's all that I need to know.
My question is answered, Your Honour. Now, Your Honour, it's likely to be a little bit smoother if perhaps Your Honour might stand the matter down for 5 minutes while I have a read of Mr. Thomas's recently received curriculum vitae.
Yes, by all means, take as long as you like. Let my associate know when you're ready to resume.
Thank you, Your Honour.
I'll retire.
Step, please.
Sam, can you bring up that?
That's fine, we do it.
All stand, please. Please be seated.
Yes, well, I think, Mr Armstrong, your confusion and mine came from the fact that Mr Thomas's first report's been tendered twice. Mr Reid tendered that on its own,
Yes.
but yes, as he says, he tendered all three this afternoon, so I wanted to just make an adjustment or not.
Certainly, thank you, Your Honour. And
I'm sorry, Your Honour. As to that, the first tender was one, as with some other expert reports, that only goes in there provisionally. If the witness didn't come along, it would have to come out. That was the agreement we'd reached. But nonetheless, we've got it in there twice, so...
Right, okay, thank you. When you mean the agreement reached between council?
Yes, the agreement reached between council. If I didn't call Colin Thomas, for example, his exhibit would have to be removed.
That's good, thank you.
thank you, Your Honour. I confirm it is now my understanding as well that all three of Mr Thomas's reports have been tendered.
Thank you.
Now, Mr Thomas, my name is Armstrong. I'm one of the barristers appearing for the plaintiffs in these proceedings. Now, Mr Thomas, earlier today, and indeed this afternoon, you've described for His Honour the investigation that you did in August 2013 that was directed at identifying the area of origin of the Fawcett bushfire. Do you recall dealing with that earlier today?
Yes, I do.
Now, could I ask you to firstly confirm for me that there is, in terms of fire investigation terminology, a distinction between an area of origin and a point of origin?
Most definitely, yes.
Thank you. And the area of origin is sometimes called the area of confusion?
Not that I'm aware of. I describe the area of origin as being the general area within which the point of origin could be located.
Okay, and then the point of origin is the actual, if I might put it this way, precise physical location where the ignition event took place.
Where the very first ignition occurred, the exact point.
Okay, thank you. Now, having heard your evidence this afternoon, would I be right in understanding, Mr Thomas, that you agree with the TFS fire investigators as to their identification of the area of origin?
I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm saying I don't disagree with it. All
right, and so the focus...
I couldn't, by further explanation, I couldn't determine an area of origin to my satisfaction.
All right, thank you. And then having undertaken the walk around the property that you've described this afternoon, your focus then shifted to trying to identify a point of origin within the area that you understood the TFS had identified as the area of origin, correct?
Not entirely, no.
Okay, so how would you describe the transition from your walk around the property to the exercise that then involved the excavations that you've described?
Yes. So the purpose of that exercise, as you describe it, was to attempt to identify whether there was any evidence of fire extension through the root structure of the subject stump.
All right. So do we take it then, Mr Thomas, firstly, that you were not able to identify an area of origin?
Correct.
And you did not attempt to identify a point of origin?
Correct.
The focus of your excavation work was simply to investigate whether you could find evidence of burning in the root system attached to what we've been referring to as the stump or the old stump or the subject stump or the pit.
Yes, any evidence at all which might support that hypothesis.
Okay. Now, when you prepared your... Sorry, you first attended at 242 Whitehills Road on the 20th of August 2013. You've already described that this afternoon.
Yes.
And your first report that's been provided to us for the purposes of this proceeding is dated the 17th of December 2018. You've already confirmed that that was the date of this report. Can I take it, Mr. Well, in fact, I withdraw that. Mr. Thomas, at the time that you prepared your 2018 report, you had run your business as a fire investigator for a number of years, correct?
Correct.
And over that time, you had investigated a very large number of fires.
Correct.
And you'd acted as an expert witness in a number of coronial inquests.
Correct.
And you'd acted as an expert witness in a number of court proceedings in the Magistrates Court and in the Supreme Court of Tasmania and other states.
Correct.
And at the time you prepared your 2018 report, I take it that you were well familiar with the requirements of the Expert Witness Code of Conduct?
Correct.
Now, at the time you prepared your first report, I take it, Mr. Thomas, that you had no intention that that report should comply with the Expert Witness Code of Conduct?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Mr. Thomas, you're aware that the Expert Witness Code of Conduct would require you to, for instance, identify your curriculum vitae.
Oh, yes, I understand your question now, I believe.
Right.
The report...
So let me put the question again. When you prepared your 2018 report, I take it, Mr. Thomas, that you had no intention that that report should comply with the Expert Witness Code of Conduct.
It wasn't, the report, to my knowledge at that stage, wasn't going to be used in proceedings.
Right, okay. And at the time you prepared that report, it had been roughly 4 months since you had attended since your first attendance at 242 Whitehills Road, correct?
Approximately, yes.
Right. And when you prepared your first report, did you do it by memory, by reference to the photographs you'd taken, or did you have any other record of your first attendance at the scene?
Predominantly the photographs and memory and some basic notes that I had of my first attendance and subsequent attendance.
Do you still have those notes, Mr.?
Not with me today, no.
All right. Do you still have them at all?
I'm not sure whether I do or not.
Okay. We're not going to finish your evidence this afternoon. Could you look for them for me tonight, please, and bring them to court tomorrow?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, in your first report, or at the time you were preparing your first report, sorry, I think you just said that you had not expected that your first report would be expected to comply with the Expert Witness Code of Conduct. Is that right?
No, I said that I wasn't expecting it to be used in proceedings.
Right. And all right then, can I just clarify then? When you prepared that first report, I take it that you did not attempt to comply with the Expert Witness Code of Conduct.
No, I didn't. No.
Right. And so for that reason, for example, if we can look at section, I beg your pardon, if Mr. Temponi could bring up document 19. And could we go to page 0394 and section 3. The sum total of your explanation of the investigation that you did and the reasoning process that you followed in relation to the identification of the area of origin is set out in the two sentences that appear as paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2, correct?
Sorry, your question was?
The sum total of your description in this report of the work you did and the reasoning you followed in relation to the identification of the area of origin of the Fawcett bushfire is encapsulated in entirety in two sentences on page 0394, which appear as paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2, correct?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Right. And then in relation to the separate question of the identification of a potential, the potential that the roots of the subject stump were implicated in the cause of the fire, the sum total of your reasoning process to explain your conclusions as to whether roots from the subject stump had been implicated in the start of this bushfire is encapsulated in paragraphs 4.1 and 4.2 on page 0395, correct?
We'll just bring those up for Mr. Thomas. Thank you.
Yes, I'd agree with that, but also the photographs also assist in that determination process because they are factual.
All right. Now, Ms. Honour can read paragraphs 3.3 through to 3.6, indeed through to 3.8, and in those paragraphs you've made no attempt, have you, Mr. Thomas, to describe the basis on which you first decided the area to excavate, do you?
No, I haven't.
You don't describe the depth to which you excavated?
No, I haven't.
You haven't described in paragraph 3.6 why it is that we see photographs of a large shovel and a pickaxe in the photographs?
I'm not sure of the relevance, but no.
All right. Now, we've also seen this afternoon, Mr. Thomas, your curriculum vitae, which you've now identified. I'm sorry, I don't have the court book number, but Mr. Temponi might be able to bring it up. It's the one that was uploaded over lunchtime. Now, Mr. Thomas, when was that document prepared?
Can we go to the... I think from recollection it was earlier this year.
All right. And was it prepared for the purposes of this proceeding?
Yes.
And at the time you prepared it, were you aware that there was an issue that had been raised as to your qualifications in wildfire, bushfire, grassland fire investigation?
Not that I was aware of.
All right. Now, in your first report and your second report, if we can go back to Court Book Document 19, and can we go to Court Book page 0393? And perhaps bring that page up next to the next page, which goes through to paragraph 1.7. Can we show 0393 and 0394, please, Mr. Temponi? Well, perhaps don't worry about Mr.
Single
Temponi.
page view should do it, shouldn't it?
Let's just go back to the preceding page, Mr. Temponi, 0393. And Mr. Thomas, you see that you've set out there your credentials, paragraphs 1.1 through to 1.6 on the first page, and then 1.7 on the next page. Do you see that?
Yes, correct.
And then could Mr. Temponi please bring up document 20? And would you agree with me, Mr. Thomas, by all means look at this document if you need to refresh your memory, but section 1 of this document is identical to section 1 of your first report, with the exception that there's now a paragraph 1.8 where you do agree to be bound by and comply with a copy of the expert witness code of conduct.
Correct.
Now, when you were preparing the credentials section in these two reports, you were, I take it as an experienced expert witness, Mr. Thomas, concerned to identify with some precision all of the experience you had in investigating fires that might bear any similarity to the circumstances of this fire, correct?
No, not correct.
All right.
It's a brief overview that I detailed in report 1 and report 2.
All right, and then when we look at your CV that was brought up a moment ago, Mr. Thomas, when you were preparing that for the purposes of this proceeding, should His Honour take it then that you were preparing that curriculum vitae at least in part for the purpose of explaining to His Honour what your qualifications are in investigating the kinds of wildfires that of which the Fawcett bushfire might be regarded as forming one example.
Yes.
Right, thank you. Now, at the time that you conducted your investigations at 242 White Hills Road, you had not obtained any qualification in wildfire investigation in which course participants were subjected to any kind of assessment, had you?
I believe I had.
Well, let's go through document 96 that my learned friend took you through a moment ago. Starting with the first page, if we can see the full page, please, Mr. Temponi. This is a 1987 certificate. It refers to you having completed a course of study and it relates to arson investigation, correct?
Correct.
And it was not specific to bushfires, was it?
No.
Okay, and now are you happy for me to refer to, in fact I'll step that back for a moment. It's your understanding, isn't it, Mr. Thomas, that the hypothesis that you were being asked to investigate in relation to the Fawcett bushfire was the hypothesis that the fire had started in the vicinity of the tree stump, had then blown to the east-southeast under the influence of the wind, and then had developed into a major bushfire, correct?
Correct.
And you were aware that the area around the tree stump was a relatively cleared area, correct?
Correct.
Now, are you happy for me to refer to that process of the fire igniting or being alleged to ignite in the area of the tree stump and then moving to the east and becoming the forest fire? Are you happy for me to refer to that as a bushfire, or do you want me to distinguish between a grass fire or a wildfire or a forest fire? Shall we just call it a bushfire?
Just a bushfire.
All right.
Yes.
Now, in relation to this certificate that you see on the screen, what, if any, tuition did you receive in the course of that course that related to bushfires of the kind that we're dealing with here?
I don't believe there was anything significant.
Thank you. Now, in relation to the next two pages, if they can be brought up on screen, this is the 1992 and 1994 certificates of attainment and attendance respectively. I think you gave evidence that neither of these involved any tuition in bushfires. Correct?
I don't believe either of them did, no.
All right, thank you. And then the next one was, I think, the only certificate. This is page 0111. This was the only one of the certificates that you said did involve tuition in what we've agreed can be called bushfires. Now, this course of instruction, Mr. Thomas, did not involve a practical assessment component at the end, did it?
I believe that it did.
Right.
I know we were assigned tasks which were evaluated in a practical environment.
All right. Now, and then just for completeness, the next two certificates, you gave evidence before that, to the best of your recollection, neither of them involved any tuition in bushfire investigation, correct?
Not that I can recall, no.
All right, thank you. Now, in the period since that 1994 course of instruction that we've just discussed, can you tell His Honour how many bushfire ignitions you had investigated by August 2013?
Yes, I don't have an exact record of that, but there were a significant number prior to 1994, the course that you refer to, a significant number post. My best estimate would be approximately 50 or more.
All right. Now, would it be accurate to say, Mr. Thomas, given that you say in your reports in this proceeding, your first and second reports, that you've examined in excess of 2,000 fire scenes since June 1996, that only a tiny fraction of your fire investigation work has been concerned with investigating the ignition of bushfires?
I'd suggest probably 20 to 30 out of that 2,000.
Okay, which would be what, 1% to 1.5%?
Yes.
Right, thank you. And your focus in practice has been on what we might call structural fires?
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Thomas, prior to August 2013, had you had any prior experience in investigating the ignition of fires through the mechanism of underground smouldering burns in tree root systems?
Yes, I had.
When was that?
I can't recall the exact date, but I recall distinctly one fire at least in the Hamilton area.
Hamilton in Tasmania or in Victoria?
Yes, Hamilton in Tasmania.
Thank you. And do you recall which decade that was?
It was after I left the police, so it would have been either in the late 1990s, early 2000s.
All right. Now, are you a member of the Tasmanian Fire Service volunteer?
No, not at all.
No, you've never been a member?
No.
Right. You've never participated in planned burns?
Yes, I have.
Right. Planned burns conducted by the Tasmanian Fire Service?
No.
Right. What kind of planned burns have you been involved in?
There were planned burns on the course certificate that's in front of us at the moment.
Right.
And other burns periodically here and there. But nothing structured through the Tasmania Fire Service at all.
All right. Well, you say other burns periodically here and there. I'm afraid I need a bit more detail than that, Mr.
Yes.
Thomas. Are these burns that you just happened to have been driving past, or burns that you had to investigate, or burns that you set?
Partially burns that I set, yes. And my father, by way of explanation, my father had a rural allotment on Bruny Island, which we used to burn regularly at certain times of year to reduce fuel load on that land in the event of a later wildfire. And I assisted my father in that process.
Right.
And reviewed the burn indicators, took the opportunity to do so.
Right, so I take it that you helped your father with that work after a time when you became involved in fire investigation?
Correct, yes.
Right, thank you. And in the course of that work that you did assisting your father, did you ever encounter the phenomenon of root systems of trees continuing to burn for some hours or days after the tree otherwise appeared to be out?
No.
Now, you have no botanical qualifications, do you?
No.
And no arboreal qualifications?
No.
No qualifications in DNA assessment?
No.
Either in vegetation or human remains?
No.
Thank you. Now, my learned friends asked you a number of questions about the excavation work that you did. Firstly, I take it from the evidence that you've given this afternoon that you selected the area to excavate because you saw in one of the photos that my learned friend took you to the black pockmark or hole in the ground on one side of the tree stump about 3 metres from the edge of the tree stump. Is that right?
I selected that area to commence based on the information contained in the Tasmania Fire Service report.
All right, thank you. So just to be fair to you, Mr. Thomas, could we bring up your report, which is document 19, and go to photograph 5, which has also been separately tendered as in its original form. And the black pockmark that I referred to, and I think you understood me to be referring to, is the black mark that's slightly to the left of the roughly rectangular rock to the right-hand side of the photograph, correct?
Yes, correct.
Right.
Or a little to the foreground of that, as I explained previously.
All right. So where the cursor is at the moment?
Yes, or a little to the foreground of that.
So if Mr. Temponi could move the cursor down, we see that there seems to be a sort of scuff or something leading from that hole to about where the cursor is now. And is that roughly the point where you decided to start the excavation?
Around that area, yes.
Right. And you decided on that area in part because of seeing that black hole and in part by reference to the TFS photographs that had been provided to you as part of the fire investigation report that you had at the time, correct?
That is correct, yes.
All right. Now, could we stick with photograph 5 on the left-hand side of the screen, please, Mr. Temponi, and then could we bring up document 24, which is the fire investigation service report, sorry, the fire investigation report. And in that document, can we go to court book page 0052? And show them side by side. Now, Mr. Thomas, if we could, sorry, Mr. Temponi, if we could enlarge the photograph 28 at the bottom of the right-hand side of the screen. Now, Mr. Thomas, you would agree with me that the first really noticeable thing one sees when one tries to compare these two photographs is that in the TFS photograph on the right-hand side, there's the large protruding rhinoceros horn of a stump to the left of the blackened wood on which we see marker number 7.
Correct.
Do you agree?
Yes.
And secondly, you would agree with me that the blackened structure of wood on which marker number 7 sits in the right-hand photo looks quite different from what might be the artefact of that structure that is left and appears in the photograph on the left-hand side.
My photograph 5, yes.
Your photograph 5, yes, thank you. Now, by reference to photograph 5, could I trouble Mr. Temponi to put the cursor on, I can't even see the cursor myself at the moment, thank you. Can the cursor go to the left-hand side of the photograph? And in fact, we might just take a screenshot of that figure 5, please, Mr. Temponi. if you'll forgive me, Mr. Thomas, I'm going to do some drawing. Mr. Temponi, could you put the cursor on the left-hand side of photograph 5, about halfway up? Thank you. And move across to the right until you're sitting on the square white rock, it might be, that's just in from the corner. Okay, put it in the centre of that rock, please. Now, sitting just up from that rock, you see a black, roughly circular thing. Can you go to the top of that black circular thing? Thank you. To the top of the black circular, thank you. Now, can you go directly to the right until I say stop? A bit faster. Stop. Thank you. Now, just go down about a couple of millimetres. A bit further. Now, immediately above that cursor, Mr. Thomas, can you see that there is a grey and black shape? Mr. Temponi, can you draw a line for me directly to the right? And stop. Now go straight up. Keep going. And stop. Now go back to the left. Keep going a bit further, bit further, bit further, bit further, stop. And straight down. Now complete that rectangle, please. Now, Mr. Thomas, would you agree with me that as best one can tell from this photograph, that looks like the top of what we might call perhaps a small tree stump that's got the grey discoloured bleached wood extending from the gravel around it, and then it's charcoal black on the upper left-hand side of that stump. Do you agree that's what it looks like?
I couldn't be certain of that, no.
Okay. Well, could we just mark that for identification, please, Mr. Temponi?
May well be my eyes, but...
All right, thank you. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, Mr. Temponi, could you please bring up Mr. Thomas's photograph 13? Thank you. Now, Mr. Temponi, could you put on the left-hand side of photograph 13, there are the two wooden structures, and could you draw a square around the top of those two wooden structures, roughly replicating what you've drawn on the left-hand side? No, just the top one, please, Mr. Temponi. No, just... Can we put the two photographs side by side, please? Now, similar size box around, that's it, thank you, that structure. Thank you, and could we mark that CT7? Now, Mr. Thomas, could I draw your attention to the two red boxes that I've asked Mr. Temponi to draw? Would you agree with me that even down to the slight irregularity in the right-hand perimeter of the charcoaling of the object that we see in the left-hand photograph, it becomes perfectly apparent that what we see there is the wooden structure that is likewise marked with the red box in the photograph, now marked CT7 on the right-hand side?
Yes, that may well be the case, and in particular, what makes me think that may be the case is the small V that extends within both red boxes on the right-hand side of the charring.
Yes, that's what I meant, the irregularity. So the irregularity seems to be fairly consistent in depth around what we can now see is the sawn-off edge of the stump, but there's a little thumb sticking out pointing towards the right. Agreed?
I'm not quite sure what you mean by a little thumb, but...
Well, what you referred to as the V.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, next, could I ask Mr. Temponi, please, to go back and bring up, we can keep the left-hand side photograph on the screen, but can we go back to the TFS report and photograph 28? I'll tender those two, CT6 and CT7, Your Honour. All right, thank you. And in fact, I'm sorry to do this to you, Mr. Temponi, but rather than photograph 5, could I have photograph 13, please, on the left-hand side? That's it. Thank you. Now, I drew your attention before, Mr. Thomas, to what I called the rhinoceros horn that is apparent in the photograph on the right-hand side, photograph 28. And there's no... please bear with me while I take this question in stages. There is no equivalent rhinoceros horn sticking up from the ground in the photograph on the left-hand side, is there?
Definitely not, no.
No. Now, the nearest thing that one can see in photograph 13 that might be the remains of the rhinoceros horn is perhaps the white object that might perhaps be described as looking a little bit like an axe with its head to the right, which is just up and to the right of the square box. That's it, Mr. Temponi is indicating it.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Thomas, that white structure was not visible at all in your photograph 5. Do you need to see photograph 5 again?
Yes.
Right, can we bring up photograph 5? You can't see any sign of it in photograph 5, can you?
No.
Right. And likewise, no, don't close it, Mr. Temponi. Could you just slide photograph 5 across to the left? Beautiful. And likewise, when you compare the wooden structure that's got the marker 7 on it, you can't tell, looking at that photograph, which parts of photograph 5 might precisely correspond with any given part of the wooden marker 7 structure in photograph 28, can you? There's just been too much change.
I'm not sure that I agree with you there. I don't think there's any doubt that that's the stump that we're all referring to.
I wasn't suggesting that there's any doubt that that's the same stump, Mr. Thomas. My point is you can't tell whether you're looking at it from exactly the same angle, can you?
I would have thought it's quite close to the same angle, Mr. Armstrong. In particular, to assist in that, perhaps on my photograph 5, if you look at immediately above the red square, near the top of the photograph, appears to be some dirt, and there's dirt apparent in the fire service's photograph 28 as well, albeit without as much grass around it. So taking those two indicators into consideration, I would have thought that they're pretty close to being from the same angle, the respective photographs.
Now, in place of the left-hand side photograph 5, Mr. Temponi, could I now get you to show on the left-hand side Mr. Thomas's photograph 13? Now, I'm showing you this because it's the clearest photograph of the object that we've marked with the square red box on the left-hand side, Mr. Thomas. When you compare what we see in that red box on the left-hand side with the photograph on the right-hand side, there is nothing that is apparent in the photograph on the right-hand side that corresponds with the red box object, is there?
No, because the soil is still in position.
Okay. Well, very well then, Mr. Thomas. Can we, instead of photograph 13, can we go back to photograph 5? I'm sorry, just replace the left-hand side photograph. Oh, thank you, you've done that. Now, again, Mr. Thomas, there's nothing in, I beg your pardon, the photograph on the left-hand side shows the wooden object. The photograph on the right-hand side does not allow one to see that protruding stump at all, does it?
Sorry, I'm not quite certain what you're referring to, Mr. Armstrong.
Well, in the photograph on the right-hand side, you can't see the object that is marked in the red box, can you?
No.
And
correct.
I put it to you, Mr. Thomas, that when one looks at photograph 5 and photograph 13 and compares them to photograph 28, what appears to be the case is that the objects that I've marked in the in the red box are slightly out of shot and to the left of the image that is shown in photograph 28 on the right-hand side.
Well, I don't have photograph 13 in front of me.
Can we show photograph 13 then, please?
And could I have photograph 5 again, please? Yes, well, photograph 5, clearly there hasn't been any excavation of the scene of the ground on my behalf. And in photograph 13, there clearly has. So,
yes.
Obviously we're going to see more in photograph 13 than we are in photograph number 5. As a result of that removal of dirt.
Yes. Now comparing that to photograph 28, which was the TFS photograph, Mr. Thomas, the TFS photograph, as you understand it, shows the extent of the excavation that the TFS had undertaken, correct?
I'm not aware of them doing any more, no.
Okay. And given what we can see of the stump and the area around the stump, I put it to you, Mr. Thomas, that the red box object appears to be located relative to the stump somewhere up and to the left of the white shovel that appears in the photograph on the right-hand side. In short, it's out of shot. Can we show photograph 13 instead of 5, please?
No, I wouldn't have thought so. I'm looking at photograph 5 and photograph 28, as I explained before. If we look at the rhinoceros horn, as you describe it, Mr. Armstrong, immediately above the rhinoceros horn appears to be maybe some dirt or something that's certainly a lighter colour, and that appears, albeit with grass around it, above the top left corner of the box. So I would have thought that both photographs would be showing a similar area.
Well, can we show photograph 13, please, Mr. Temponi? Mr. Thomas, I asked Mr. Temponi to indicate before that what I referred to as the white axe object, and if Mr. Temponi could perhaps circle that with a green line. Now, Mr. Thomas, it's possible, would you agree, that what we see circled there with the green line is a discoloured, further broken down remain of what appears as the rhinoceros horn in the right-hand photograph? It's just taken from further away.
I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought that the section of, or the tomahawk-shaped piece of, I believe it's a piece of root, as you describe it, and circled green, I would have thought is closer to the stump than what you call the rhinoceros horn.
Mm-hmm. Now, the alternative explanation, Mr. Thomas, is that it's about the same distance from the stump, it's just that the angle of the photograph is slightly different.
It's certainly closer range in photograph 13. I don't know that the angle is significantly different though.
And you can't see in photograph 13 the location of the white pile of clay or sand that is at the top of the rhinoceros stump in photograph 28, can you?
It'd be lovely if the photograph was a little bit higher and we might have been able to, but no, because of the way the photograph is cropped or taken, it's not obvious.
Now, what I want to put to you, Mr. Thomas, is that the angle from which these photographs are taken relative to the stump is very similar, but sufficiently different that when they are compared, one can see that the area that's been excavated in the right-hand photograph is actually in about the bottom right-hand quadrant of the left-hand photograph.
I wouldn't have thought so, no.
All right, and can I just, again, to make this clear, Mr. Temponi, could you put the cursor, and we're going to draw some green lines, can you put the cursor at the top of the letter C on CT7? And could you go up, please, to, there's a brown patch of soil further up, about there, stop, and could you draw a line straight down to the bottom of the photograph? And then from the top of that green line, could you go down about 45 degrees to the right until you reach the edge of the photograph. But perhaps let's make it 20 degrees. about there. Thank you. So what I've asked Mr. Temponi to indicate there, Mr. Thomas, is that when one allows for the apparent slight difference in angle between those two photographs, the area of excavation on the right-hand side seems to be roughly in the area of the green slice that I've drawn in the photograph on the left-hand side. Would you agree?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. By way of explanation, photograph 28, if you take the right side edge of the stump and come straight down to the bottom of the photograph, I would have thought that the area depicted as being excavated down to the roots in photograph 13 was virtually the same, as close as you could get to the same location, Mr. Armstrong.
Well, I see the time, Your Honour.
Yes, all right. We'll adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I think, Your Honour, just before Your Honour rises, I'm just grateful to my learned junior. Over lunchtime, Your Honour, we received a further report from Mr. Gilmore. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I gather it was made yesterday. And can I just let Your Honour know that we would have expected to receive such a report before I was expected to close my case. And if there's anything arising from it, then I will. I'm just foreshadowing. I've only just received it, haven't read it, and if there's any issues, I may need to raise them with Your Honour, by way of potentially having to reopen our case to deal with anything that might be arising from Mr. Gilmore's recent writings.
It might even have different consequences to that.
Yes, Your Honour, it might.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Thank you, Your Honour.
All stand, please. This honourable court now stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Thank you.